Good evening, everyone. Give me a sound check, and also, can you test my system is going very slow right now. Good evening, happy Friday. Am I lagging? Just let me know. And thank you, Elfon, for becoming a member. Please do, of course, do all that good stuff. But happy Friday. Let me know if I'm lagging, and how do I sound? How's my volume? Give me a quick sound check. No echo. Let me know if I'm lagging, because my system is it says I'm low res right now. This makes sense to me. Yeah, okay. I see that now. That's very frustrating. Very frustrating. I'm a little blurry. I want to correct that, though. I definitely want to correct that. Let me see. Yeah, I'm a little bit blurry. Let's see. No lag here. No, everyone's saying I'm not lagging. Okay, some people are seeing a small lag. So some people are saying I sound a little soft. I can definitely raise the volume. Thanks everyone who's choosing this stream tonight. I know there's a lot going on. Some people are saying, look at the quality. Let me see. Hold on. Let me just turn the mic up a little bit. All right. Happy Friday, everyone. Let's see. How's everyone doing? Yeah, I'm still pretty blurry on the visuals. Uncool. Well, let me be right back. Let me try to fix this, okay? I'm going to put the be right back card. Everyone stick around. It's Friday night. Our guests are coming on at 10 p.m. Eastern. So in about 45 minutes, okay? 45 minutes. And I'm going to try to cover a couple stories before they get here. So while you're waiting, like this video. Make sure that you hit that subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and be sure this is independent media, completely independent. So we have a new member, Elfon, who just joined in the chat. Thank you so much. You can join as a member on YouTube. The best way to support this work, though, is on Patreon at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. I'm going to try to fix this camera issue, and I'll be right back. Hold on one second. All right, everyone. How do I sound now? How do I look? Is it any different? Do I look any different? Do I look any better? Not. I don't know. Let me know. I did my best. I turned on and off the camera, did all that stuff. All right. So all good now. Starting a little bit late. Um, like this video, guys. Happy Friday. Good evening. We have a great program for you. Great program. We have Mr. Carl Zaw and Brian Berletic coming on in about 40 minutes. Okay. Um, some people are saying loud. Hello to all the moderators. Hello, Big Teal. Hello, Loa. Hello, all the other moderators here. Am I sounding too loud, though? Let me know. Okay. I'll talk quieter if I'm sounding too loud. Uh, all right. Happy Friday. Let's get this show on the road, all right? Because I did want to cover one or maybe two things before Brian and Carl get here. Okay. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for spending your Friday night with us today. Or at least it's my Friday night. I know some people in the chat are saying it's their morning. Whatever time of the day it is for you, it's likely a Friday or Saturday. So thanks so much for coming out this evening. Let's get started, though. Okay. Hello, everyone. Greetings. We'll see Brian and Carl in 40 minutes. While you're waiting, like this video. Looks like we already have 235 likes and 212 viewers. Let's try to boost the viewers by sharing this on social media, whatever you can do. Thanks so much for liking this video, though, and helping keep this channel boosted, keep this stream boosted. All right, let's do this. So first story, where do we even start? I mean, so much has happened. I thought I was going to go live 2 days in a row, and I decided against it. So, a bunch has happened since I was last on. And first thing I want to talk about is Mr. Vladimir Zelensky. So, as you know, every year, Time magazine comes out with their Person of the Year. I'm going to take these off. Comes out with their Person of the Year award, right? And Time magazine, this is a imperialist rag. We should know this by now. Time magazine had an affinity toward Nazi's Nazism back during World War II. It was a huge proponent of Churchill and the British imperialists, and it's always been essentially the equivalent of a neocon rag from the very get-go. We're not talking about some sort of transformation. You could never even have called Time magazine liberal by any stretch of the imagination at any point in its history. So Time magazine already had this very establishment bent. So it's no surprise that Vladimir Zelensky, the president, the leader of Ukraine, would get this coronation. So Zelensky has been awarded the Person of the Year for this year. And not only him, but also, as you'll see here, it's not just Mr. Zelensky. And as you see, there's a paywall, so I had to archive this. It's not just Zelensky who's the Person of the Year. It's also the spirit of Ukraine. Read about the people who represent the spirit of Ukraine. So what is Time magazine talking about? I'm not going to go over its coronation because it's absolutely sickening what they do. I'm not going to go over the whole coronation, but I wanted to just react to what exactly Time magazine is celebrating here. Because what we've seen in the last, what has it been now, 9 months of conflict with Russia through Ukraine as a proxy, this U.S. NATO-led conflict against Russia, what we've seen is Zelensky become the so-called hero of democracy for the collective West and for the United States. And that's essentially what they're celebrating here. They're trying to paint this, as they have from the very beginning, as a so-called unprovoked war. And of course, Zelensky is their, is their figurehead. And he's a very poor one at that, because we know so much about Zelensky, not just the fact that he is backed by oligarchs, that Ukraine is one of the most corrupt and privatized shock therapy economies in the world. It's a very poor country. It was poor when he came in, and it's only gotten worse since he has taken leadership, especially during this crisis. And and you have seen the coverage we had here when I had Ben Norton on the show, where we covered how Zelensky opened up the New York Stock Exchange not too long ago, just a few months ago, saying Ukraine is open for business, meaning Ukraine is open for full privatization. And that's what's happened. In Ukraine, what has Zelensky done? He has privatized basically anything that was state owned before this conflict. Now he has also gone after collective bargaining rights, eradicating those. And of course, he has basically stomped all over any opposition to his rule by instituting a form of martial law, claiming that it is like wartime privileges. So Vladimir Zelensky has been a very repressive figure, but a very friendly figure for the imperialists, for the United States, for the collective West. And that's why he is a hero. They don't say at all, right? What they won't mention is all of the crimes that Zelensky and his government has committed, not just in this conflict, because they've killed a lot of people in this conflict too, through their constant shelling of the Donbass region, of Donetsk, of Lugansk, of Kherson, of all these regions. They've killed a lot of people just in this conflict alone. But even before February 2022, Zelensky had done nothing to curb the out-and-out assault and violence against the people of the Donbass. Something that's not mentioned at all. It's a media blackout. It's a Western corporate media blackout. They don't mention the thousands upon thousands, more than 10,000 Russian-speaking people in Donbass who were killed by Ukraine's security forces, Ukraine's military, which has a lot of neo-Nazi, just out-and-out Nazi forces and far-right forces embedded in its military and political infrastructure, right? You have whole street names in in localities across Ukraine, but especially in and around Kiev, named after people like Stepan Bandera. This is the society that Zelensky oversees. And of course, Time Magazine is willing to overlook all of that, because now this award, right? I've gotten a lot of flack for saying, well, Vladimir Zelensky joins people like George W. Bush, like Donald Trump, like Barack Obama, like Winston Churchill, like Adolf Hitler, right? All of these imperialists and these fascists who have been coronated, who have been celebrated by Time Magazine as the person of the year, he joins them. And some will say, well, what about Martin Luther King? What about Gandhi? What about, we're always accused of whataboutism, right? But now everyone has a whataboutism when it comes to Zelensky. Oh, what about Putin? Because in 2007, Putin was celebrated. Well, let me just make a comment. Time Magazine would be an incredibly stupid institution, a ridiculous. It already is a reactionary institution, but it would be out and out foolish to just celebrate oligarchs, fascists, and imperialists. So, of course, people like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, they're co-opted and celebrated momentarily when it's convenient for the establishment to do so, when it makes them look good. But of course, the vast majority of forces are either milquetoast establishment figures or out and out imperialists who are celebrated with this award. So where does Zelensky fall? We have to be precise. If we're going to be analysts, if we're going to be activists, if we're going to be Marxists, or if we're going to be geopolitical experts or anything like that, we have to just be precise. So we have to take Zelensky for who he is. Zelensky is not Martin Luther King. I'm not a Mahatma Gandhi expert. But I know that Zelensky is surely not Martin Luther King Jr., who was against war and who would never advocate for a political leader, let alone activists, be armed and funded by the very imperialists that he opposed, the United States and its allies in Vietnam. He would never do that. So if Zelensky is not Martin Luther King, well, who is he closer to? Well, of course, he's closer to the forces that are basically bankrolling his entire political legitimacy. His entire legitimacy rests on imperialists, on the collective West, on the United States, to brand him in the way that he's been branded as this so-called democratic leader opposing the unprovoked, quote unquote, war that Russia is waging. His entire existence depends on this. So he is closer to them because he has carried out their agenda. That's the fact of the matter. So if Zelensky has carried out the collective West in the United States and NATO's agenda, then I don't think it's incorrect to say, well, congratulations, Vladimir Zelensky, for winning an award and putting you in the same vein as people like Trump, Obama, Bush, Adolf Hitler, etc. I'm sorry, but Ukraine has far-right forces, neo-Nazis, all of that inside of its government, inside of the military. So, and it's not even a secret. It's an open just fact that's just normalized now because, oh, it's not that many, even though you see them all the time. And, they got pounded in Mariupol by Russia. This is what we're sold by institutions like Time Magazine, which is really just carrying water for NATO and trying to rebrand Zelensky in a time where things aren't going so well for Ukraine, for the United States and NATO-led project. They're not going so well in this proxy war because, well, there is a lot going on that spells basically danger for the entire project. You even have Joe Biden, you have generals, you have all sorts of forces now saying, maybe we got to talk. You just saw the exchange between the United States and Russia. Brittany Griner now back in the United States for Mr. Boot, this so-called arms dealer. There was an exchange. And we all thought, oh, well, they can't talk to each other. The United States says it would never talk to the Russian government. And here they're talking. And now the United States, Biden is hinting at maybe negotiations while at the same time escalating all along the way. So you have this very contradictory policy because the US and NATO are living in a contradiction right now. They're living in an out-and-out quagmire. They have one time not on their side. Winter is here, and Russia's offensive is coming. It should be happening in the next month or so, at least beginning, where you'll have hundreds of thousands of Russian troops beginning their operations. You already have Russia conducting these missile campaigns, which are very effective in destroying Ukraine's infrastructure to the point where Ukraine doesn't really have an energy system that's workable right now. It is a very dire situation, and that's only going to get worse the more and more that Russia, steadily escalates and allows winter to do what it does, especially to the EU and the United States, which are facing an economic crisis. The Europe is basically already in an economic crisis. Sorry for all the noise, everyone. This is the hood. So you're hearing sirens. Apologies. Can't do anything about that. Distracting for me. But Ukraine is in this terrible situation. Now the EU is basically in an economic crisis. Prices are just incredibly high. They can't replace the Russian energy that they've sanctioned off of the map for themselves. They've cut off their own source of energy, and Europe doesn't really have any solutions. They're going to try to just float by, but it's likely not going to work, and the situation is going to get very bad, and it already is very bad. It's going to get worse as the days get colder and colder. So this is really a very sticky situation. Not only this, the United States and NATO, especially NATO, is out of weapons. So Ukraine is now wants so much more support, but NATO doesn't really have the ability to give it right now. It's run out of artillery. It's run out of weaponry. And so who knows what's going to happen? But what I do know is that this coronation of Zelensky is nothing but a public relations stunt in an attempt to save a leader, a political leader who's really a puppet, is really to save his legitimacy in the eyes of the public opinion of the collective West, of the United States in particular. And nobody reads Time magazine, so it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But it is important to note that, Zelensky being Person of the Year is really all about the broader propaganda war against Russia and painting this proxy war, painting this very dangerous proxy war that threatens to spill out into a hot war between Russia and NATO. It's to paint this war as legitimate, as justified, and as something that should continue indefinitely. There's a real conflict going on right now internally within the elite forces that control the United States and NATO. There are forces that do believe that things need to cool down, and they need to cool down as soon as possible. And then there are forces, especially the military industrial complex, which believe, no, we need to secure all that we can and then build out from there. We need to secure all the contracts. We need to secure all of the military aid deals, and then we will build more. Then we will arm Ukraine more, and then we will fight more. We will allow Ukraine to fight to the last Ukrainian. We don't care about how many people die. We don't care about nuclear conflict. We just outsource all of that to the political servants, to those to that political class in the collective West in the United States that's willing to carry our water. The military-industrial complex wants to see this continue, wants to push it forward, wants to even escalate it, wants it to get worse. And so, you have these conflicting forces. You even have generals. You have people like Mark Milley who are saying, well, maybe we need to at least talk, right? And then you have the State Department in the United States basically controlled by neocons. You have, the undersecretary, Miss Victoria Nuland, essentially just a neocon warhawk who is to the right of the Pentagon, because the Pentagon does understand when weapons are flowing out and there's not enough to bolster Ukraine to the point where it's effective. Well, the Pentagon understands that that's not feasible. That's not something that's sustainable. And so while I don't believe the United States is interested in peace to any extent, I don't believe 1 second that the United States is interested in peace, or the Pentagon is interested in peace. I do think that they understand that this war has to look different. It has to have ebbs and flows. But we know that certain forces like the military-industrial complex, like the neocons in institutions like the State Department, but also in the Pentagon and of course, all across that NATO alliance, they want to see this be pushed to the maximum effect, and they don't want any kind of curtailment of this, because in some respect, they know that if there is a pullback, it may never get back to the point where it once was. Do you know what I'm saying? These forces, the ruling class, they understand that history is always in motion. If we don't understand that, they definitely do. And they know if there's any significant change in this conflict to the benefit of Russia, and to any degree when it comes to diplomacy, that this thing may never get back to where it is now. And that means a lot of lost profits in the future. So that's all I wanted to say about Zelensky, because we have plenty of other stories, and there's a big one. There's a big one that I think is even bigger than Zelensky, because I think Zelensky's he's pretty worthless. So we're going to start with Brian and Carl about 20 minutes, but I wanted to just go over this next story, okay? The next story is Angela Merkel. She talked to German media recently, the last few days. This has not gotten any media coverage. The Western mainstream media has not covered this one bit. But one thing that has happened in the Western mainstream media is that Angela Merkel spoke to the German press, and she said something very interesting that we should be aware of. She revealed what we basically already knew, that the Minsk Accords were nothing more, the Minsk Agreements, 2014, 2015. I don't know if you remember them. These Minsk Agreements, where you had Eastern European states, Russia, but you had France and Germany mediating with Ukraine around a ceasefire to ease hostilities, because now this is never talked about in the Western mainstream media and at all. It was back then, not at all. But Ukraine's government at that time was on a full throttle assault of the Donbass, of these republics, right? Of these breakaway republics that were or had already declared independence, mind you. They were being assaulted to the point where thousands of people were being killed. And this was a stain on the coup regime. The United States had just supported this coup, had made this coup happen, right? Victoria Nuland caught on the telephone speaking to the ambassador, saying, F the EU, we want this guy in the government. He became the president, you remember that. And so this was a stain. This was a real political, just black stain on the garment of this, on the design of this war. And so the West wanted to try to broker a ceasefire. Now, these Minsk agreements went nowhere. 2014, both of them didn't go anywhere. What ended up happening was Ukraine just kept going. And the mediators, Germany, France, Collective West, the United States, they did nothing. Russia, on the other hand, played it cool, didn't intervene to a high degree. There was the referendum with Crimea that allowed Crimea to join the Russian Federation. But really, Russia was mostly hands-off at this time. But now we know from Angela Merkel herself that the Minsk Accords, the Minsk Agreements were not genuine. The West had no intention of this doing anything but buying time to militarize Ukraine. So Merkel has admitted deception over Minsk peace deal, says Russia. The former German chancellor has disclosed that the accords were meant to, quote unquote, give time for Ukraine to strengthen its military. So, at this time, what German chancellor, this was your German chancellor at the time, Angela Merkel, she confirmed her government's duplicity regarding the conflict in Ukraine by confirming that the 2014 ceasefire agreement was meant to give Kiev time to build up its military. In an interview with Zeit magazine published on Wednesday, Merkel said that the Minsk Protocol, brokered by Germany and France, was an attempt to give Ukraine time, which it used to become stronger, as evidence on the battlefield now. She was referring to the first of the two documents known collectively as the Minsk Agreements that were designed to help Kiev reconcile with rebels in the east who had rejected the outcome of an armed coup in the capital in 2014. Berlin, and by extension the West, never intended to implement the Minsk Agreements. And this is based on Russia's foreign ministry, Zakharov spokesperson. She concluded based on her remarks. The U.S. and its allies simulated supporting the UN Security Council resolution, which endorsed the roadmap to peace while pumping weapons into Ukraine and ignoring all crimes committed by the Kiev regime for the sake of a decisive strike against Russia. In the Zeit interview, Merkel stated that Russia could easily have overrun Ukrainian troops in 2015, adding that she doubted NATO countries could have done so much then as they do now. The second part of the Minsk Agreements was signed in February 2015 amid a military defeat suffered by Ukrainian troops, which attempted to quash the Donbass rebels. So this is damning. This is saying Merkel says straight up that we were just planning to provoke Russia. What do you hear all of the time in the Western mainstream media? This is an unprovoked invasion. This is an unprovoked war. Russia is doing this unprovoked, right? Well, this just shows this was a plot. This is a plan. You are planning to strengthen Ukraine's military to do what? Fight Russia. Fight Russia at some point in the future. And so Merkel's description of the accords coincides with comments made by former Ukrainian President Pyotr Poroshenko, Mr. Poroshenko, during whose tenure they were signed. Domestically, in August 2015, he stated that the peace deal was a ruse to give his government time for a military buildup. He said the same thing to Western audiences in June this past year. So here we are. I mean, we hear all the time Russia did this unprovoked. Look at what Russia's doing in the Donbass. Look at what's happening in Ukraine. Russia's committing this and that. You remember not just too long ago, a couple weeks ago, the EU couldn't stop talking about there needs to be a tribunal against Russia. Russia needs to be held accountable for war crimes. This whole damn conflict is the EU's fault, is NATO's fault. They were hedging their bets. They were saying that all of this peace talk was nothing but talk. It was nothing but an exercise to buy time, to buy legitimacy for the real plan, which was to arm Ukraine, which is what happened. Ukraine kept on getting military aid packages. You remember even before February of 2022, Ukraine was getting more and more lethal aid over and over and over again, more and more arms. The military was getting ready. The military was getting ready, and Russia responded. Now, we didn't think that Russia would conduct a full-scale operation because of how Russia had behaved in the past, right? We were all under the assumption that, well, Russia's taken a lot in the past. It'll take a little bit more because it's hard to imagine Russia standing up to the empire. It really was hard to imagine. So I can admit when I'm wrong. I couldn't have imagined it in February 2022 before the 22nd. I couldn't. And then it happened because history is always in motion and we all make errors. And the biggest error I think we could have made was underestimating how serious this situation was. I like to believe I didn't do that, but this situation was always more serious than I think we could have understood, given that we don't have all the intel. We don't know exactly how things are on the ground. We can just analyze the situation from the outside and hope that people who are there, like Patrick Lancaster and others who have made the travel there even before February of 2022, that they can help us understand just how dire and problematic the situation was. But nonetheless, now we have the evidence. Now we don't have to ask questions. Now we can say with certainty and with confidence that even Angela Merkel herself, right from the horse's mouth, right from the mouth of the perpetrator, saying that everything was a ruse. Peace was always a ruse. Negotiations was a ruse. Now, the consequences of this are huge because it's not just that the EU, that NATO, that these countries have been provoking Russia and then propagandizing against Russia, saying there needs to be a war crimes tribunal. It's not just the sanctions and the war and the arming and all of that that's happening inside Ukraine on the battlefield, but it's also this propaganda that leads into this hypocrisy, which then makes it harder for Russia to trust the collective West, to trust the United States in particular, because what's to say that any negotiations that happen in the near future aren't just a ruse again, aren't just to buy time for Ukraine? I don't think that Russia is going to let up unless demands are met. That's my opinion. I don't think unless there's concrete documents that are signed that say Ukraine will be neutral, we're going to demilitarize, the war will be over, we're going to allow there to be this stalemate, and then, you two can figure it out on your own. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think that's the only thing Russia would accept would be for there to be an out and out withdrawal of NATO forces, neutrality, and the allowance of Russia and Ukraine to talk without interference. That's not going to happen. And how could Russia trust any other scenario after what they just found out from Merkel? How could they? How could they trust any other scenario? It's just not possible. Why would Vladimir Putin, Sergei Lavrov, right, all of it, Shoigu, all of the forces, right? Why would any force in Russia's foreign ministry, Russia's political leadership, why would they trust the collective West at this point, given what has happened? It just wouldn't make any sense to me. So why would it make sense for them? And so this is a situation that NATO has put the world in, that the United States led collective West in their imperialist, rabidly imperialist system. That's a situation they've put the world in. Russia was not has not been conducting an unprovoked invasion. Russia was the definition of what it means to be provoked. This is so easy to confirm, but we don't even have to go far anymore. We just have to read the words of people, or listen to the words, but really read the words of people like Angela Merkel, who are just saying right to our face that this is the case, that the collective West is led by a bunch of lying warmongers who have an ultimate objective of waging war with Russia. And so they will use countries like Ukraine as their firing squad, as their launching pad for this. This is how the collective West treats other countries. This is how imperialism and neocolonialism work. It's all about hegemony. It's all about domination. And it's all, Ukraine is, they don't care about Ukraine. They don't care about Ukraine's internal politics. They could care less about how the people live in Ukraine, about their worsening situation, about how this conflict is only making their lives that much more worse. And they were already one of the poorest countries in the region, extreme poverty rates very high. That's only gotten worse, and they don't care. They really don't. All they want is for Ukraine to be a military and political satellite in this broader hybrid war, this broader war of attrition, war of aggression toward Russia. That's really all they want. And that's what's going to continue to happen unless there's some real pressure. And now that pressure can come from a lot of places. It can come from Russia placing pressure on the battlefield. That is surely to happen. It could come from the economic crisis, which is going to place a lot of pressure, not only on the livelihoods of people in Europe, in the West, in the United States, but also just on the general global economy. And then there's also the pressure that people can put on the governments of these countries, of the NATO countries, what Pepe Escobar calls NATO stan, and of the United States. That surely as well, that unrest could surely hurt this war effort. And I think all three of these things together could place pressure for some kind of change in the diplomatic situation. But I'm not so confident. I'm just not so confident in that. So we'll see what happens. But we've got a ways to go. We've certainly got a ways to go in this conflict, and I'm going to be very curious to see what Carl and Brian have to say when they are here. We got about 10 minutes until they arrive. All right. So we have 538 people watching. We have 420 likes. Keep liking this stream. Let's try to get to 500 before they come on. Share this stream, of course. Hit that subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And be sure to support independent media by subscribing at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong or as a member on YouTube. We already got a member who has joined today. Thanks so much to them. Thanks so much for JM, a current member who left a super chat. And, there are many other ways to support this work in the description of this video. So we're going to talk about, actually, I'm just going to make some brief comments, but I wanted to talk about really quickly, and then I'll bring Carl and Brian in when they're here. But, China is conducting a diplomatic masterclass right now. It is quite astounding what China has done. You saw it at the G20, really looking like the adult in the room, really looking like, Xi Jinping was just going around embarrassing Justin Trudeau, speaking with Joe Biden from a place of confidence. And also, with Indonesia and other countries at the ASEAN, ASEAN summit, the ASEAN summit. You also had the economic cooperation forum that also happened. You had, in Indonesia and in Cambodia, and this was all held in Asia. You had China really come out looking very strong. After the 20th CPC National Congress, You also had Vietnam and Cuba, the leaders of those countries visit. And now we have China traveling abroad. In the first visit that China has made, that Xi Jinping has made, is at the unprecedented and milestone diplomatic event called the China Arab Summit. And of course, this was held in Riyadh, and it brought together the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, also Egypt, among others. And these countries have come together to say, we are not just going to be US vassals anymore. This is an incredibly significant development because it comes amid all of this diplomatic strength that China is showing. Also, with the Taiwan election, which did not go well, you saw these China protests, which have pittered out, and China just responding and saying, look, we can reform our COVID policy. We were doing so anyway, and these protests mean nothing. They didn't even comment on them. You can't find comments in the Chinese media anywhere because they weren't seen as that important. Believe me, China is going to comment on stuff they see as important. They didn't see the protests as important. So Taiwan election, these protests, the diplomatic achievements, both at the G20, at the ASC, ASEAN summit, the ASEAN summit, and then bringing Vietnam, bringing Cuba's leadership to China, and then this China Arab Summit. It's a huge deal because it was Saudi Arabia that organized this whole thing. Saudi Arabia said, look, we have this Saudi Vision 2030. We want to build more. We want better infrastructure. We need to pivot toward China. We need to think about, are we going to trade oil in yuan? We need to think about BRICS Plus. Saudi Arabia is saying, Joe Biden administration, the United States, they're not treating us like real partners. They're still looking at us as we are just your oil well for you to exploit because we need your weapons. That relationship is not mutually beneficial in the way that it used to be. Now, the United States has caused massive chaos in the region. Now, the United States is looked at as a failure. And now the United States is getting quite prickly with Saudi Arabia. You would think that the United States would want to keep cordial relations with Saudi Arabia, but the Biden administration has felt compelled to attack them on human rights. It's not like there isn't anything to attack, but still, the United States is the biggest human rights violator in maybe the history of the world, but certainly in the last century. There's no bigger purveyor of human rights violations and war crimes than the United States. And anything Saudi Arabia has done so largely in part because of how the United States has supported, Saudi Arabia, the petrodollar, all of that, the militarization of that government, all of it. But now Saudi Arabia, Qatar, these countries, they're fed up with the way that they're being treated. And they're saying that China is the future and they're going to move toward China. So I want to show you a quick video as we wait. So here is just a demonstration, right, of how, this is a quick report from CGTN, but you'll see the footage in Saudi Arabia of how China was received. And a comprehensive strategic partnership was signed, more than 35 different agreements. But that comprehensive strategic partnership says that there will be regular meetings among the heads of state within their respective countries, and that they're going to plan around. I think they signed something like something like 35 different agreements in all sorts of different areas. And so this comprehensive strategic partnership is very robust. This in and of itself is huge, but this isn't even getting to the point that China was meeting with everybody, was meeting with all of the Gulf Cooperation Council states, was asserting its defense of Palestinian rights. It's just a diplomatic masterclass, and it's making the United States and the collective West look like they're falling behind because, hint, hint, they are. So just watch this.
King Salman bin Abdulaziz Al Saud and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman extended a warm welcome to President Xi and expressed sincere congratulations on the success of the 20th National Congress of the Communist Party of China and on Xi's re-election as General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee. President Xi says Saudi Arabia is an important member of the Arab and Islamic world. China will work with Saudi Arabia to deepen practical cooperation in all areas, increase communication and coordination in international and regional affairs, and achieve even greater progress in the China-Saudi Arabia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. The two sides agree to synergize China's Belt and Road Initiative and Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. China will increase coordination with Saudi Arabia on energy policy and expand the scale of crude oil trade. China will also deepen industrial and infrastructure cooperation with Saudi Arabia, level up trade, investment, and financial cooperation on e-commerce, clean energy, high technology, and space research, and enhance cooperation in law enforcement, counterterrorism, and de-radicalization. China has decided to designate Saudi Arabia as a tourist destination for Chinese group visitors, so as to expand mutual visits and people-to-people exchanges between the two sides. President Xi says under the current situation, to convene the first China-Arab State Summit and the first China-GCC Summit is of special significance. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman says Saudi Arabia looks forward to working with China to enhance mutual support and jointly elevate comprehensive strategic partnership to a higher level. It is believed that President Xi's visit will become an important milestone in the history of this relationship. He appreciates China's support for its Middle East Green Initiative and will work with China to strengthen cooperation on areas such as clean energy and green development.
So I don't have to play the rest of it. You get the gist. We are looking at a real realignment here, and this is a perfect time to bring in our guests because I think this is a great place to start our conversation. So without further ado, we have Brian Berletic of the New Atlas and Carl Zav, Silk and Steel podcast. Hey guys.
Hello, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you both. Carl, I appreciate the wreath behind you. Very festive.
Very festive.
Well, let's get started. I just want, I wanted to first, I think we'll have definitely a lot of time to like talk about the connections between what's going on China with the US's aggression toward Russia, China. But I wanted to start with this China-Arab summit because it just concluded. I guess it's now, if we're looking at China time or your guys' time, it concluded yesterday. But I wanted to ask you all what you think, and maybe we can start with Brian. What you think about this, because Saudi Arabia organized this. Saudi Arabia said, we want to have a China-Arab summit. We want to bring together the GCC countries. We want to invite Xi Jinping here, and we want to build increasingly strong ties and make these ties very formal and basically talk up what is something that I think the United States sees as its playground, right? The United States sees the Middle East, sees this region as its playground, and Saudi Arabia and the GCC, despite all of the deep relationships they have with the United States and the rest of the West, are saying China is more favorable in a lot of ways. So what did you think about this summit, and were you following it all? And I'll start with you, Brian.
Well, I just want to go back. Does anyone remember when General Wesley Clark talked about 7 nations in 7 years and how he was talking about the U.S. has this window of opportunity to sweep away all of these Soviet client states and assert hegemony basically over the entire planet. And so that is what they were doing from 2000 onward. That was the whole point of the so-called war on terror. It was a pretext to launch multiple military operations all around the globe to coerce allies and adversaries alike. And it's very clear that they ran out of time. That window is closed or is very near to closing, and that's what we're watching. That's what I think this meeting between Saudi Arabia and China represents. But we have to be careful because Saudi Arabia has a long history of also approaching Russia. Many times they've done this, approach them, talk about all of these deals they want to make, all of this investment they want to do, and then they don't do any of it. So I think we have to wait and see. But I think the possibility of this leading to something much more significant, I think the possibility is quite high. Saudi Arabia is in a predicament. A lot of people see Saudi Arabia as an ally of the United States, but I think they're more like a hostage, and they're trying to weigh, the pros and cons of trying to wrestle away from the U.S. and potentially being shot in the back, or remaining a hostage and a human shield, essentially, to bear the brunt of the consequences of U.S. foreign policy before the U.S. itself has to bear the brunt.
Yeah, Carl, anything you want to add? Oh, you're muted.
I muted myself. No, I think Brian covered it pretty well, because we have to keep in mind it's a real possibility that Saudi is using this approachment with China as a bargaining chip with the United States. Because right now, as we all know, U.S. and Saudi relationship has been rocky in the past few years. And Saudi might do this as a way of saying, look, we got other options. We can turn into China. We can potentially move off from the petrodollar train, because they have been floating out the idea of talking about trading with China in RMB for Saudi oil, which would be a big sea changer, because as we know, the U.S. hegemony over the world is based on military, technology, and financial. And a huge part of that financial dominance is through the petrodollar, because in the 70s, the United States would work out a deal with Saudi to price the crude oil in US dollars. Now, if you look at today's trade, for example, between Saudi Arabia and China, it totally dwarfs whatever Saudi has going on with the United States. I was looking at the trade numbers. The amount of the oil that China imports from Saudi Arabia in one quarter is more than what U.S. imports from Saudi in a whole year. So I think the number I saw floating around was $50 billion. $50 billion worth of oil export from Saudi Arabia to China. Saudi Arabia is a top one supplier oil to China. The second one is Russia. So if Saudi does move to really to trade to accept RMB as payment for the Saudi oil, that will be a huge shock to the world financial market. It will be a huge shock to the U.S. petrodollar hegemony. I'm still a little bit skeptical, just like Brian. I adopt a wait to see attitude. I'll believe it when I see it. But right now, incrementally, we do start to see the crumbling of U.S. hegemony around the edges. Like even if they just start a small amount of trading between Saudi Arabia and China in RMB, that people can see the writings on the wall, because that's just the beginning of that. That's just the beginning, right? I mean, so it's to put U.S. on notice. Like, look, you can't ignore us as Saudis and take us for granted, because we have options. We can turn to China. So that is a real possibility. We have to see. But on the other hand, the Chinese foreign policy has always been, we'll make friends with anybody, right? I mean, if you look at the Middle East situation, China actually managed to have a good relationship with both Iran and Saudi Arabia, which is very rare, right? And so the Chinese position is, we are just here to do business. We don't care. We're not going to interfere your domestic affairs. That's your business. We understand you are from different culture, different background. That's not, how you govern yourself. That's none of our business. We are just here to to do business in a mutual beneficial manners. So it's quite a different approach from U.S., which has won China a lot of friends around the world in the past, I say, 20, 30 years. I think recently there's a poll, a global opinion poll. A lot of people in U.S. like to show that the public opinion of China has worsened considerably in the Western developed countries. Of course, we know that's due to the heightened propaganda machine based from Washington. But if you actually look at the opinions of China in the global South, in other words, in much of the rest of the world, outside the so-called international community made up of U.S. and its cronies, people's perception of China is a lot more positive than their perception of the United States. So the tide is shifting. We live in interesting times, so we'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, and you made me think about how the Arab world certainly has no shortage of divisions, and what's so interesting is watching this China Arab summit. You see key countries like Syria, excluded from it, and I think that's because of there's divisions in the Arab world, lots of conflict between states, and a lot of it is facilitated by U.S. meddling. But at the same time, you're right, Carl. China says, well, we'll work with everybody. Saudi Arabia and GCC, they can't say don't work with Syria because we have a conflict with them, or Iran because we have a conflict with them. They don't say that because at the end of the day, whether it's bargaining chip or they actually need economic development, I think it's a combination of the two. It's like, China's in a very unique position right now. And I want to do something with you too. I want to start with Brian with Ukraine, and then I'll move to you, Carl, with Taiwan, because I feel like the roots of a lot of this change happening in the world, multipolarity, de-dollarization, a lot of it has to do with these central kind of focal point conflicts. And so, with the Russia-Ukraine situation, a lot has changed around the world because of it. I want to start with you, Brian, with Ukraine. Like, where is the situation now? I was just covering Angela Merkel's revelation. We already knew this, that the Minsk agreements were nothing but a ruse, nothing but a way to buy time to militarize Ukraine and to lead into the situation that we're essentially in now. But where is this situation now, and how do you feel like it relates to this changing world order, where it seems like no matter how much the US and NATO want to try to weaken Russia, Russia just becomes more and more important in this multipolar trend that's developing worldwide?
Well, you're absolutely right. Ukraine and also Taiwan, they become, a battlefield that this much wider conflict is being waged on. And the situation in, the German chancellor admitting that. And then when you look at policy papers from the RAND Corporation, like the one titled Extending Russia, which laid out a plan to do exactly what the West has been doing to Russia through Ukraine, using it to provoke Russia and extend Russia. That was the whole plan. They laid it out in complete detail. It's there in black and white for everyone to read. So people who are skeptical about whether or not Russia was provoked, I mean, it is a signed and dated confession, essentially. And now you have politicians in the West, high-level politicians in the West, admitting that, yes, we were just buying time so that we could build Ukraine up to become an even greater menace right on Russia's border. So where is the conflict right now? Well, before I explain that, I think it's important to lay out that the West trying to dominate the entire planet at this point in time is irrational, it is impractical, and it's not going to happen. It's not going to work out. And people who are pursuing impractical, irrational policies at the most basic level, that is the foundation upon which everything else the West does is built. And then when you look at Ukraine and where are they now? The West and Ukraine, they're running out of trained manpower. They're running out of weapons. And they admit that. At this point, they're admitting that. And Russia is, already has a head start in terms of military industrial capacity. And they are building it up At the same time, the West is trying to catch up just to where Ukraine's needs are right now, which will not happen for years to come. So logistics is what determines a conflict like this, especially it starts to stretch out for a long period of time. It's not just a brief clash. It is an actual protracted conflict. Logistics is going to determine the outcome, and logistics is clearly on the side of Russia. So that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and Carl, I wanted to turn to you around Taiwan because we had these local elections that happened recently within the last few weeks. And then you have this new arms sale. I think it was around $400 million for some more military toys going to Taiwan from the United States. Where are we at right now? Because there was a lot of enthusiasm among those who are pro one China principle around these local elections. They are local elections, though, and so it'd be interesting to see how this plays out. But where do you see this situation and its relationship to this changing world situation? Because it feels like while things with China and the United States had this cooling period, there still is a lot of intense rhetoric coming from NATO with China, coming even from the Biden administration toward China. And it's likely to intensify now as things like this China-Arab summit, things like that continue to develop. So with regard to Taiwan, though, where are things exactly after this election, after this arms sale? Like where are things regarding this situation?
Oh, you're muted, Carl.
The U.S. propaganda machine has been cranked up to 11 on how U.S. involvement in a possible war over Taiwan. Because as Brian pointed out earlier, there is a significant portion of members of Pentagon that thinks U.S. have a very small, limited window to stop China's rise. The idea is that within the next 10 years, if China is allowed to continually rise peacefully as they're doing right now, eventually Chinese GDP, Chinese military power, economic power will reach the point where United States can no longer contain China, even if they wanted to. So the idea is we got to do it now while we still have a chance, while U.S. still enjoy overwhelming supposedly military advantage, at least on paper. And Taiwan is a hot button issue. So U.S. is going to press it. The U.S. know Taiwan is a hot button issue when it comes to China. I mean, the Taiwan issue is really not an issue between, say, the island of Taiwan and the mainland. It's really a U.S.-China issue because for the longest time, Taiwan functioned basically as a U.S. protectorate, your U.S. client states. And the fate of Taiwan is decided between Beijing and Washington. And now back to the Taiwan elections. The government of Tsai Ing-wen, the DPP party that she represents, which officially on its party platform still advocate for Taiwan independence, they my friend Xiang Yu, who I did a Taiwan history series, pointed out that despite the rhetoric of DPP, despite their stated aim of achieving Taiwan independence, for as long as their party has been in power, they actually never really moved to formally declare independence or even declare a public referendum. Like they say they would, but they have plenty of chance to do it, but they never did it. Well, one reason is because back then, United States wouldn't allow them to. Taiwan would not be able to do anything without explicit go-ahead from Washington, right? So back then, before U.S. and China was still at a relatively stable, has relatively stable relationship, U.S. administration back then didn't want to rock the boat. So they didn't want Taiwan government to unnecessarily be provocative toward China. Now that has changed, especially since the Trump administration, but really started from 2012, the pivot to Asia that started under Hillary Clinton. And now U.S. is encouraging the Taiwan government to do whatever they can to piss off the government on mainland. So their hope is that China will act rashly and irresponsibly and will give U.S. military a perfect excuse to come in. But so far, China has played very cool, and they have handled it very rationally. They did not take the bait. Even when Nancy Pelosi flew into Taipei on a U.S. Air Force plane, China didn't shoot her plane down. I know a lot of people were disappointed, but China didn't even intercept her plane, just let her land. And in the end, it's just a photo op. And China did not give U.S. an excuse to start a military intervention. And because, China understands China would not want a war right now over Taiwan. Contrary to what our Western media, mainstream media has been saying, because time is on China's side. Every year, Chinese economy grows just a little bit bigger. And this is what U.S. planners are afraid of. They're afraid that after 10 years, China will grow so large that U.S. couldn't do anything. So time is actually on China's side. China have been waiting 70 years to resolve the Taiwan issue. They're not in a hurry for 2022 or 2023. There's some ridiculous idea floating around Washington saying that China is trying to resolve Taiwan issue in 2027. Guess the only place I heard that idea is in the English language media, right? Nobody's talking about that in China. You go to Chinese social media, Chinese media, nobody's talking about like a date of 2027. They're going to do something about Taiwan. It's only the people, the think tankers funded by the military-industrial complex that's pushing this idea really hard in the U.S. media right now. Well, back to the Taiwan election, though. The Tsai Ing-wen government has been pushed for confrontation with China for a long time, and that's their election strategy. They thought, okay, as long as we go anti-China and we provoke China enough, if China acts, then we can use that as a excuse to scare our voters. Like, see, you got to vote for us because we are really the ones that's standing up to China, right? But what happened in the past few years, because China did not take that bait, now Tsai Ing-wen government, they're kind of left with nothing to show. What have they done for the electorate of Taiwan? What have they done for the voters in Taiwan? Did they improve the lives and economic prospects of Taiwan? No, everybody could see that. Taiwan's economy is faltering, and on top of that, it's been pushed along by the action of the United States. Huge portion of Taiwan's economy is tied up with semiconductors, the TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductors. And what the United States is doing, it's forcing TSMC to relocate to United States, to relocate all the Taiwan engineers to US, to Arizona, and accepting less pay. There's actually a good articles on that. People can look it up on the so-called cultural clash of TSMC moving to Arizona. Well, what they call cultural clash is actually that they decided they're going to get the Taiwan engineers to Arizona, but pay them less. So TSMC is a crown jewel of the Taiwan economy. That's what's driving Taiwan economy for the past decades and decades. And now the U.S., one reason U.S. is moving Taiwan, TSMC out of Taiwan is they are planning. They're planning in case of conflict with China, they would still maintain their chip supply. So they didn't want. They have U.S. Pentagon have publicly said if a war break out over Taiwan Strait, U.S. would not leave the TSMC plants in Taiwan intact to China. So they're literally saying they're going to bomb TSMC rather than give it to mainland China. And people, I think people in Taiwan, they finally get it. They finally understand that this path is not good for the future of Taiwan. 40% of Taiwan's exports go to mainland China. Taiwan's economy is already intimately intertwined with the mainland China. Tsai Ing-wen's administration have done its utmost trying to kind of derail that relationship, derail the continued cross-strait integration, economic integration, and that has put a damper on the Taiwan economy. And when they're playing divisive identity politics didn't work, we saw that results in elections. But in the end, the Taiwan voters woke up and said, you haven't done anything for us in the past how many years. You have not improved our lives. You can be all anti-China all you want. In the end, like Bill Clinton said, it's the economy, stupid. They're not done anything to make the economy of Taiwan better. They're not done anything making the future for the Taiwanese people better. So this is a main reason why they're losing the election. And I mean, in terms of U.S., right now we're going to see we're already seeing a series of provocation from U.S. Starting from Nancy Pelosi, and now we're talking about the more. I don't know what the figure is, like like I saw a bill like they're going to approve some billions of dollars for arms sales to Taiwan. And U.S. is a source of instability in East Asia. If you just take whatever they say in the mainstream media reporting about China, flip it and replace China with United States, you'll be 100% accurate, right? When they say China is a source of instability in East Asia, you just replace China with United States. You actually have pretty fairly accurate reporting right now. And we are entering into a very dangerous territory because now, as Brian pointed out, U.S. is a declining power, and now it's trying to lash out, trying to protect its hegemonic status. And hopefully, you won't drag the rest of us down, the whole world down into that path. That's why we're here voicing our opinions and really pointing out the ridiculousness of the situation here.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about one part of this ridiculous situation that I know I've spoken with you, Brian. I don't know if I've done it on stream yet, but it's something that you've commented on in your streams, and I definitely want both of your opinion on this. So we have a situation where the U.S. is leading very dangerous conflicts against Russia and China, war provocations. This has been going on for a while, as you said, Carl. It's been a decade in the making, at the very least, in just its modern iteration, let alone the history that I know you and Brian did a really great conversation on that everyone should check out on the new Atlas. But I wanted to ask you about this divide, because I think one of the biggest and most dangerous parts of this, aspects of this, is the propaganda war. And what we've seen is, even among people, and maybe we can start with Brian, even among people who oppose the US's and NATO's meddling, outright war provocations, militarization of Ukraine, right, provoking Russia, waging this war that's building up, this Cold War building up into a hot war. Even for people who are there, a lot of people still have hangups about China. So while you have all of this happening with Ukraine, all of the lies, right? Zelensky Person of the Year, then you have these protests in China, and everyone's like, oh, this is, even people who oppose, interference in Ukraine against Russia, people are saying, oh, well, this is great, whenever the U.S. is interfering with China. And so I wanted to ask your opinion about this, Brian. Like, why is this the case? And then, Carl, you can definitely respond with your own opinion. Like, why is this happening? What do you feel like are the biggest reasons why there is this gap? It's almost like a China gap. Like, there's just when it comes to Russia, there are more people who are willing to question this dominant narrative, the lies, and the propaganda war than China.
I think it's mostly a phenomenon we see in the West, and I don't want to generalize because there might be a variety of reasons, but some of the examples that I've really examined to try to answer this very question, it comes down to people having personal political proclivities that they are deeply invested in. They are anti-communist. They know nothing about China. They just know it has a red flag with yellow stars on it. And so they don't like it. And their mind is shut like a steel trap. It will never open on this issue because they reject communism wholly. They don't want to know what the truth is. They're not interested. They've already made their decision. And so not only are they going to close their mind to information about China, but they will be more receptive to negative information that reinforces their negative political proclivities regarding this issue. Now, I've been to China. I live in Asia. Asia does most of its business with China. China being communist, I don't even know what that means, because in China, people have private property. They do business. You walk through the streets. It looks exactly like anywhere else you live. They have state-owned enterprises, but then so does every other country in the world, including the United States, for that matter, except the state-owned enterprises in China actually function and serve a purpose. So I think that is a big component of it. I also think, quite frankly, and a lot of people don't like when I say this, but I don't care because it's true, it's racism. Russians look like white Americans and white Europeans, and Chinese people don't. And it's as simple as that. They have, and maybe it's not necessarily their fault. They are brought up in a climate, especially in the United States, a toxic climate of racism, especially toward Asians. It's like the one exception. If you're a racist and you need to let off some steam, just say something about Asians, because it seems to be, especially now, okay to say when all of these other groups are off limits. And so I think there's a lot. I think that has a lot to do with it, because a lot of the people that I notice saying this, they come across as racist and they come across as anti-communist, but not anti-communist in an informed way. Anti-communist in the most ignorant and superficial way. And so it's something that I work hard to try to break through, because it is a real issue. And it just goes to show that these people who are divided like this, their ultimate concern is not the truth. It is to cultivate their own personal political proclivities, just like the people they claim to stand against. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
I completely agree with whatever Brian just said. I mean, ultimately, it stems from ignorance. There's a lot of ignorance about China, so people just accept. When your only source about China is all this mainstream media or like Falun Gong channels on YouTube, like China Uncensored, or Jennifer Zeng on Twitter, then you have a very skewed view of China. And most of these people probably never have been to China. I think both of you have traveled to China, right? I grew up to China, so we know the China that we know is completely different with the one that was presented in the Western media. But for many people, that is just not their part of their personal reality. And also, like I noticed that phenomenon. It's not one part. Yes, some more like the conservative right-leaning people, the anti-communism definitely plays a large part of that, because they see Russia as a white Christian conservative country, and they see China as this godless commie alien, civilization. But even on the left, a lot of people on the left, even in U.S., for example, they will gladly call out the bullshit that U.S. media is published about Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, etc. But when it comes down to China, they just regurgitate whatever they have ingested from the mainstream media about China. Again, that's stemming from ignorance and also racism, like Brian pointed out. It's that kind of Western chauvinism. Like, we know best, right? We know best. That that's why even a lot of when Chinese people on Western social media like Twitter, when they talk about their experiences in China, they get questioned. They're like, "Oh, you're just a CCP bot, right? You're just like you're brainwashed." It's like. Because some people, I actually see some people who claim that they know China better than Chinese people live inside China because somehow they get more information. They have freedom of information. There's all kind of information floating around. No, all the information you're getting is propaganda, man. It's like this is you think this is the difference between people in China and Russia versus people in the West is that people who grew up in Soviet Union or grew up in China, they know what state media is. They know state media's function is to serve as a mouthpiece of the government. So they process that information accordingly, right? And whereas people in the West, they're like, oh, we have free media. So they don't even realize that is propaganda. They're being bombarded with propaganda constantly, since birth. So when that become part of their identity, So when their ideas about China, for example, gets challenged by someone from China or someone who have traveled to China like you guys, they get defensive. they fall back to what they learned from the mainstream media. Like, no, China is authoritarian, it's totalitarian, it's a dictatorship. But if you because they are just regurgitating right now. They don't even know what they're saying. Not you have to explain to them. Look, protests in China happens, and you actually make Chinese government alter its policies. You see, Chinese government is actually quite responsive to public sentiment, unlike what our governments are in the West. Like I think many of you pointed out, during the BLM protest, we got millions of people in the streets in United States. What have that accomplished?
More people have been killed by the police this year in 2022. It's not even 2022 still. We have about a month. More people have been killed by police than any other year recorded. And there isn't even that many years recorded because the government won't do it. But anyway, continue, Carl.
And what they have accomplished is that the government had increased the police budget all across the country. And whereas in China, like several hundred college students raised a protest, and then suddenly a few days later, Chinese government just relaxed the zero COVID policy all across the board. This is a difference, people. Yes, there's censorship in China. Yes, Chinese government always try to restrict large gathering of people to prevent a kind of national huge protest happen, like a repeat of 1989. Like they learned their lesson from 1989 student protests. Chinese government themselves do not want a repeat of Tiananmen. They don't want Tiananmen 2.0. Unlike the Western media, they're like vultures. They're like eagerly waiting for Tiananmen 2.0. Like I remember in the Hong Kong protest 2019, right? Everybody was waiting for the PLA to roll tanks into Hong Kong for another Tiananmen 2.0. I'm like, you guys are crazy. You're not only you're bloodthirsty. I mean, like this. This again plays into that kind of racism point of view, because they don't see Chinese people as people. They for Chinese people, for them just kind of props to validate their own ideology, right? Their own ideological stance. What happened to Chinese people actually doesn't really matter to them. This is a different, whereas Chinese people, even if they're protesting in China, their ultimate aim is to improve their lives. They want to see improvement in their life. Whereas the propagandists in the West, when they see protests in China, they see opportunity for regime change. Damn the consequences, right? And this is, so I'm ranting again, but this is just kind of ridiculous. A lot of how effective the Western propaganda is, brainwash entire population in this This is why we're here, right? Because we're here to counter that narrative. Like we would all not be doing this if like the media is actually doing its job and providing a fair and objective analysis. But that's not what's happening. People are not getting the real information on China. Okay, I'm done. I'm stepping off my soapbox. So.
I just want to add. I want to add on to something Carl said. Carl said Western chauvinism, and my experience with, say, the Western expat community here in Thailand. Doesn't matter if they're extreme right, extreme left, right, kind of moderate right, conservative, left, liberal. The one common denominator across the entire spectrum is that arrogance, that we know best, we know better. It manifests itself in different ways, but the bottom line is we know better than you. Thai people don't know. We know, and we will tell you. And sometimes it just comes out as overt racism or suppressed racism, because essentially you're saying our society, our culture, everything about us is better than you, and you're not capable of even understanding what we're talking about. So you should just do what we tell you. And this is a sad reality. And I think that is something we're trying. And you know what's ridiculous is that as China rises, it is shattering this myth of Western supremacy, because you see China doing things that the West cannot even do it. And that is, how all of millions of people out there in the West who have this idea that they are the best is being shattered. And it's when someone's entire world comes crashing down, it's usually not good. It's not good.
Yeah. I mean, you both of you said it just perfectly. I mean, with the racism and the anti-communism, I mean, that was always there. But now you add in this element of economic anxiety, which also, and this anxiety about American hegemony and supremacy. And you add in the fact that, you hear John Mearsheimer, right? This like realist, he's seen as this expert on Ukraine because he had a correct position on a foreign policy question. And then you hear him talk about Taiwan and China, and he literally just says, yeah, no, it's not in the US's security interest for China to become more influential in Asia. He paints it as, China being like us in Asia, China treating Asia like its backyard, like we treat Latin America as our backyard. This false equivalency of China is just another empire, just another great power seeking to dominate. But at the same time, that reveals this very issue of, well, it's because China already has all of these qualities to it, which threaten just this deep-seated hatred of socialism and communism and Chinese people. But then you add in this element of, well, China actually is moving forward as a leader in the world in a much different way than the United States. And it's just like the head explodes, and they can't take it. Anyway, Carl, I know you want to get in here.
No, I mean, I am in complete agreement with both of you guys. I think there's a lot of there's also the fact that for the past, since the end of the Cold War, because U.S. no longer has an ideological competition with Soviet Union, the U.S. ruling class have been gradually rolling back all these concessions that have been granted to the working class that they had to make during the Cold War. And so we are seeing, increasing wealth disparity, wealth divide. The U.S. is reverting back to like the 1920s Gilded Age level of, division of wealth between like the top 1% and the rest of the 99%. And add on top of that, let's face it, U.S. is just oligarchy run for the business interests, and in the end of the day, these business interests, they don't care about the common American people, and what we've seen, the result of those policies, including offshoring, offshoring, offsourcing, is the U.S. economy has been hollowing out, and the U.S. middle class is getting squeezed. The working class is finding harder and harder to get on in U.S. So coupled with all these kind of economic anxiety about the future of U.S. and where the society is going, the politicians then find it very convenient to find a scapegoat for all their own failures. They look, it's China's fault. Blame China. China makes a perfect target because it is this great unknown alien communist civilization that represent whatever we are not in the United States. And it must be their fault that they're eating our lunch, right? They're eating our lunch. It's not because our multinationals have decided to take advantage of cheap labor and offsource our industry over there to chase higher margins. And they this is very toxic combination that resulted in kind of the rampant xenophobia we're seeing today. Because I remember an example, even like COVID. When COVID first the outbreak first reported in China, everybody including the mainstream media, they're just watching what's happening in China like a circus. Like, oh, okay, look at this China. What are they doing over here? It's crazy. But at the same time, they have done nothing to urge their government to do something. They act like the COVID would never affect them. And when China did successfully initially contain COVID in after the early 2020. And when the rest of the world are going through lockdowns and the pandemic ripping through the society, I remember when Wuhan first opened up, there was so much jealousy, envy, and resentment. I mean, people are like, how dare these motherfuckers celebrating while we are being locked down in our buildings? It's like, look, like just a few months ago, you were laughing at those Chinese, wearing all these hazmat suit and trying to disinfect everything. And now somehow, but that kind of sentiment at large, it permeates, I would say, at least the U.S. society. I can't say too much about Europe. I don't know too much about Europe, but at least in U.S., in the American society, this is kind of a U.S. is failing. U.S. is failing. It's flailing, both like in terms of its foreign policy, its economic policy, but also at society level for individual Americans who are just trying to get by. And China just present this perfect foil as the official public enemy, that we pin all the blames on China. And I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to ask, and you both can comment on this, because there is this divide, right? China definitely is seen less favorably than even Russia, despite, the Russophobia in the United States and the collective West is out of control. But still, I think with Europe, there's some proximity there. There's this energy relationship, but the Russophobia has been still absolutely out of control. In the United States, the same deal. But at the same time, there is this divide. And, I wanted to ask you about what is the connection then? Because even people like John Mearsheimer will say, well, Russia's weak, so that's why the United States shouldn't treat it so badly. It should be allying with it against China. I feel like that opinion, well, I think utterly ridiculous and reactionary and completely out of the realm of reality. It's not really a popular opinion among what we would call the foreign policy brass at this point. There's a lot of opinions that Russia and China are both enemies and the United States should deal with them both. And so what's the connection that they're making then? What connection are the neocons making that it seems like, while there's some more people questioning the Ukraine situation, maybe more so now than ever because it's going so badly, there's fewer questioning the aggression towards China. what is the connection that the elite are making that seems to that people are kind of missing here? Like, why are they waging this kind of two-front new Cold War like conflict against both of them?
Well, again, you have to, when you're trying to sort something out like this that's very complex, go all the way back to zero and start over and start building up your knowledge of the situation. So when you look at these people as individuals, neocons as individuals, they're racist, they're in many cases white supremacists, but also Western supremacists, and they have this unending need for power and wealth. And so starting from an extremely irrational foundation, everything they build up on top of that is going to be rooted in fantasy. And so that's why they're, pursuing a ridiculous, unrealistic policy toward Russia, and then an even worse and more unrealistic policy toward China. Think about how irrational it is. John Mearsheimer, he says he's a realist. Well, if you're a realist, you're looking at China that has a larger population than the G7 combined. You're looking at their industrial base. You're looking at their world-class infrastructure. They just completed a space station in low Earth orbit. When you're looking at all of these things, then you should ask yourself, is it actually realistic to believe that the United States should even try to maintain primacy over a nation bigger and just in terms of industrial economic capacity better than the United States? Shouldn't realistically the United States find a rational role, constructive role to play among nations than this irrational desire to impose itself upon all nations? And if that's what it comes down to, they're starting from an irrational foundation, and everything built on top of that is dangerously unrealistic.
Yeah, I mean, even Mearsheimer. Actually, I have more respect for Mearsheimer because he's more honest than some of these other folks who claim U.S. is doing it for democracy or freedom. Mearsheimer at least pretty straightforward to admit U.S. is doing this for power, for hegemony. But his assumption still is that U.S. is a norm. U.S. is normalcy. That's why everybody must act also like United States. That's his assumption about China. If China achieves a great power status, it must act like U.S. Must also be like the rampaging empire across the globe. But this is kind of people live in U.S. for so long, they don't understand. U.S. is not normal. U.S. empire is not normal. This is not the norm. It's an exception. You cannot extrapolate United States to everywhere else in the world. People outside your borders don't think like you. They approach things differently. As we can see, China's approach is obviously very different from that of the United States. But they were just saying, oh no, because right now they're not as powerful as the United States yet, so they have to hide it. They have to hide it. Well, they've been hiding it pretty successfully for the past 30 years. But the thing is, it goes on to that Western chauvinism mindset. It permeates the U.S. society, so people don't even aware of it. Like people, you guys travel outside U.S. Brian lives in Thailand, so from outside looking in, U.S. is crazy. Like from where I am right now, I'm looking at United States today. I'm like, oh my God, it's a crazy place. But people in U.S. because they live in that society, they grew up in that environment. They're just not aware there's even a different alternative possibility. And I think, sorry, I ran so much, I forgot what your original question was.
That's okay. I forgot too. So I think we can move though to. I wanted to ask, maybe you could start with this one, Carl. I want to, with the Ukraine situation being where it's at, and with the fact that the United States is in this, it is in this crisis. I mean, it can't really achieve what it really wants in Ukraine. And at the same time, it has all these plans for Asia, all these plans for China and trying to contain China. But, Taiwan and Ukraine are often compared. And I wanted to ask you, do you see this going in that direction? Do you see Taiwan going in the Ukraine direction? Because there's so many differences that people, I think, miss. But at the same time, there is still, just on the militarization component from the US side, there are similarities. So do you see this going similarly to how Ukraine has turned out? Like, I know there's all these rumors of, oh, China's going to take Taiwan and, unify it by force very soon. And ironically, the date you pushed out there, it's like, oh, well, that's kind of close to when the US loses its GDP supremacy. That's very close to that time where it probably will be smaller than China GDP wise, or getting there soon. So I don't know. Do you think that the way that Ukraine has turned out? Do you see Taiwan turning out in the same way?
Well, I think first of all, I want to just say that a lot of people think it's crazy that U.S. is being antagonistic toward China and Russia at the same time, right? That doesn't even make sense for a neutral observer from third party view, but it actually makes perfect sense in U.S. bureaucratic point of view, because you got a whole NATO apparatus that was built up through decades of the Cold War. Even if people like Mearsheimer wants to have a better relationship with Russia, to ally with Russia against China, that whole NATO bureaucracy is not going to agree to that, because the whole reason for NATO's existence is to contain Russia. And this is why we're ending up in this situation right now. U.S. is knee deep in the Ukraine crisis. But at the same time, I also need to remind people that the people who are bearing, first, the people who are directly bearing the burdens of the Ukraine war are the people in Ukraine. And the next are people in Europe. People in Europe are now suffering from high gas prices in this winter. United States come off actually relatively well. Like the high energy prices in Europe is now driving European manufacturing firms to relocate to United States. That the whole reshoring thing they talk about vis-a-vis China didn't happen. It's the European manufacturing are now moving to United States. At the same time, U.S. is able, after they blow up the Nord Stream, I'm pretty sure they blow it up. After they blow up the Nord Stream, now United States gas export to Europe is skyrocketing. So U.S. is actually profiting from the war in Ukraine. Now, on the side of Taiwan and China, there's some superficial similarities and also similarities in terms of how the U.S. military-industrial complex views the world. They view Taiwan just as another proxy, just like how Ukraine was a proxy war versus Russia. I'm sure some would love to have a proxy war with China. They will fight the People's Liberation Army to the last Taiwanese. That's why all these propaganda channels in U.S. are screaming, why is Taiwan not investing more in its military, right? Like, whereas the people in Taiwan, even the Tsai Ing-wen DPP government, their expectation is like, no, we're expecting the Marines to come in to save us. It's like, why do we need to invest in our military? It doesn't make sense. But that's not the U.S. plan. I think the U.S. have also understood, as much as they want to turn Taiwan into like a Ukraine situation vis-a-vis China, the time and place is just different. In Ukraine, you have a radicalized minority that was being put in power. All these neo-Nazis that was in power in Ukraine. We don't have that situation in Taiwan. Even have all these hardcore independent supporters in Taiwan. If you ask them about military draft, they will be jumping on a plane to United States, heartbeat. And that's why even the government on Taiwan, Taiwan's government, have shortened their military draft from, previously 2 years then to 1 year, and now like 4 months. You're not going to learn anything in 4 months. I mean, Brian, you can probably comment on that. How much military training you're going to get in 4 months?
Not nothing. I mean, no, nothing. I mean, you have basic training, and maybe, I mean, yeah. I mean, this is ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
So I mean, like another reason Taiwan is not investing in its own military infrastructure is because they know China. They know China is not crossing the Taiwan Strait anytime soon. They know that the actual threat of a PLA landing in Taiwan is pretty small, pretty minimal. Like they're the one who are living it. They're living on the Taiwan Strait. They know PLA is not going to cross in Taiwan Strait anytime soon. That's such a so there's a whole Taiwan society is not militarized like Ukraine was. That's the point I'm trying to make. And there's I also find it hard to imagine to even move towards the Ukraine direction. Like I said, even the hardcore independent supporters, they would not fight for Taiwan. They would just fly to U.S. Many of them already have green cards or passport. And so like you have a situation. This is I don't see. I mean, I don't know how much United States government understand that situation because like. It's a lot of times they just work out things purely from their head, but that's the reality in the ground. You are now seeing some articles coming out blaming Taiwan for not getting their military preparedness up to a ready state, but it's never going to be. It's not never going to be. That's one. Another reason is the difference between Taiwan and Ukraine is that the West have been building Ukraine since 2014. So the Ukraine conflict really started back 2014 from Maidan, Maidan protests, etc. So U.S. the NATO have been building up Ukraine forces, training them, and that's why I think the one logic for Putin to launch the special operation is because the thought is if they don't do it now, you will be much harder later on. And in fact, there are already some people are saying Russia should have done this in 2014 rather than waiting to do this now when U.S. Ukrainian forces is like a lot more capable than it was in 2014 through the NATO training and the funding and all the weapon transfers, etc. Again, time is on China's side. Time is on China. Ultimately, it's depending on Xi or whoever in power to Beijing to push that button and say, let's go. But so far, China is patient. China doesn't have the urge to push the button right now. It's the U.S. right now trying to push the button. And China is not taking the bait, and that's another reason I fail to see a kind of the only scenario I would see Taiwan Strait becoming turning into a hot war scenario is if U.S. government got really desperate and they push the Taiwan government to declare formal independence. Now that is crossing the red line, and that would definitely trigger a military response in conflict. But we're not there yet. I mean, hopefully we'll never get there. So because right now everybody know what that red line is, and I don't know how. Like I said, the war over Taiwan will never be like a proxy war a la Ukraine, because Taiwanese military by itself would not be able to resist, would not be able to hold off an amphibious operation by the People's Liberation Army. So that would necessitate the direct involvement of the U.S. military. Now that is the $1 trillion question. That's not even $1 trillion question. That's like the radioactive question, because the moment that U.S. comes into direct conflict with China in a hot war, and many U.S. Pentagon defense officials have already said, the moment a U.S. aircraft carrier gets sunk, it's very likely U.S. will use nuclear weapon, tactical nuclear weapon. And there's really nothing about tactical nuclear weapon that's, I mean, once you use nuke, it's over. Like, there's no climbing down. Like, there's no, how do you de-escalate from a nuclear exchange? You don't. You could just goes from tactical nuclear to strategic nuclear exchange. And then the next thing we're talking about is the end of civilization as we know it on Earth. It's gonna be fallout. For the people who play games, they know what I'm talking about. It's gonna be fallout, the post-apocalyptic world that we're gonna be all living. So I know U.S. planners are crazy. I don't know if they're that crazy. I mean, I as far as I know, most of the Pentagon officials are still, perfectly willing to ride the hog, increase the tension between U.S. and China, so they can continually profit from the military-industrial complex, the gravy train, to pour billions and trillions of dollars into boondoggles like F-35, so they can get more kickbacks and they can retire comfortably to their McMansions in Virginia. That is still the goal for most U.S. Pentagon high-level officials. I think at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know anybody who is real crazy enough about to be really gung ho about a nuclear exchange with China. That's my 2 cents.
Can I add on to what Carl
Please.
was saying about Taiwan? And if you think that I'm wrong, please, I can stand corrected. You're right. It cannot be like Ukraine. It is an island. They're not going to be able to send weapons to this island, Taiwan, like they are to Ukraine through Poland. Look at the other problem Ukraine has. Anything that breaks down has to go back to Poland to be repaired, because any repair facility in Ukraine is going to be hit by missiles. Taiwan is right there. China has probably the largest arsenal of weapons, not just in terms of quantity, but also variety. They have varieties of missiles that the US and Russia weren't able to develop over the years because of various arms control treaties. The idea that China needs to cross the strait and like land on Taiwan to do damage is bonkers. It's just completely unrealistic. They could do it through blockade. Again, it's an island, blockading it and using missiles, drones. Their air defense systems are so advanced they can cover the airspace over Taiwan without ever having to leave the mainland. So that would be a very complicated conflict for the U.S. to get involved in. What I think that they would want to do, and again, this is because they write these things in extreme detail in these policy papers that they almost always go off of. They want to trigger some sort of conflict over Taiwan so that they could justify a global blockade of Chinese shipping worldwide. And they could do this far beyond the reach of China's Navy. And the irony here is that the West is always portraying China as this growing imperial power, it's building up its military to impose itself on the rest of the planet. And yet in these policy papers, they admit that China does not even have a blue water navy. Blue water navy means you have a navy that is capable of complex operations globally. China cannot do this. They have not developed this capability. Their strategic airlift capability is also not capable of and is not being developed to carry out complex global operations thousands of miles away from Chinese territory, like the US does. So when we're talking about, Carl, because you were talking about how China is not like the US, and people who assume that it will be, that's because they are stewing in the US. They don't realize that the rest of the world is not insane like that. They are not building the institutions they need to impose themselves politically. They're not building the military to do it militarily. So that this is what they're thinking about doing, but I think it'll be a huge miscalculation. Look at what's going on in Ukraine and how badly the West miscalculated. They are prepared for an intense but limited clash, shock and awe, and then mopping up afterwards. They are not prepared, and they will not be prepared for years to come for a intense, protracted conflict like what is playing out in Ukraine. And if they cannot do that against Russia, there's no way they're going to be doing it against China. I also think that if you look at the way China is developing its Belt and Road Initiative, this northern route across northern Russia, they're thinking of ways of breaking this blockade before the U.S. even imposes it. I think the U.S. and its allies will be disappointed, just like they were when they put these, shock and awe sanctions on Russia, which just blew up in their face. I think the exact same thing is going to happen to China. China has a complex economy. I know it has a massive population, and there's a possibility that the population is so large that major disruptions economically can't be absorbed, but then again, maybe they can. I know economies across Asia are very complex. In other words, it's not just a service economy. They have a lot of manufacturing, agriculture. They're resilient. They're resilient down to the local level. You have people who own local businesses, local supply chains. It's very resilient. So like in Thailand, for example, COVID hit, there was economic disruption, but because it's economically resilient, because of this complex economy from local to national to international, the way they've set it up, they were able to weather it much better than many other countries. I think China is aware of this. Russia was aware of this. They were focused on self-sufficiency for years and years. They saw this coming and they were preparing for it. I think China is doing the exact same thing. So again, it's an unrealistic ambition to begin with. It's an ambition that Russia and China are well aware of and are preparing for, and they are in a better position to contest this than the U.S. itself, who's initiating this, which they don't need to, but they just feel compelled to do it because of, again, this, I would say, deranged ideological profile that they have.
I like to piggyback on what Brian just said. Like Brian pointed out, Taiwan is an island. All China had to do is do a naval blockade. At that point, U.S. will have to decide what step they will take, because Taiwan by itself will not be able to break through the naval blockade, and U.S. either sending the U.S. Navy and triggering World War III, or as Brian said, practicing a global blockade of China, which they're preparing for. But then again, China has also know that, and they're also preparing for that, because U.S. Navy made no they made no secret of the fact that Strait of Malacca is their choking point for the U.S., for the Chinese lifeline, for the Chinese maritime trade and energy supply. So one reason for China's Belt and Road Initiative is to diversify its trade route and its energy supply. So that's why you are seeing China building ports on the coast of Pakistan, on the parts of Myanmar. China is building, fast tracking the railroads through Russia, and now with the global warming, the ice cap melting in the polar region, now the Northern Passage is open. China's shipping now can sail through the strait between Alaska and Russian far and Kamchatka, and go through Arctic Circle to reach Russia. That route has been proven, and in that case, if US gonna choke off that supply line, that will involve Russia into the conflict again. So the U.S. talk about China's string of pearl strategy, by building all these ports, and the whole reason that for China to build a series of ports is to diversify its energy supply route. So there's no one choking point like Strait Malacca where U.S. Navy just can blockade the entirety of Chinese energy supply or the Chinese trade route. Now U.S. Navy would have to go all over the globe. I mean, even U.S. Navy as its present configuration would not be enough to blockade, say, deploying Pakistan to blockade it, to deploy to Myanmar to blockade it, or to deploy to Alaska to blockade the Northern Passage. I mean, it's impossible task even for the U.S. Navy currently. Of course, the U.S. Navy plan is, to build 355 ships, and as I believe the 7th Fleet Commander said, that if you could build ships that allow him to walk across the Pacific, he would. But there's what you wish for, and then what you're capable of. I don't think the U.S. is capable of that kind of a global, being the global policeman anymore. I mean, so I agree with Brian. I just don't think things will play out the way that the U.S. planners have think that they're going to play out.
Yeah. And one more thing, just to add on to that, think about how the world reacted to the situation in Ukraine. The United States thought we're gonna put these mega sanctions on Russia. Everyone's gonna fall in line. Russia is going to be isolated on the global stage, and instead the West has isolated themselves. The rest of the world is still doing business with Russia, and Ukraine is recognized by the UN as a nation. Taiwan is not. It is recognized as part of China. Nations here in Southeast Asia have no interest at all in this game that the U.S. is playing, this double game regarding the one China policy. They completely respect China's sovereignty over Taiwan. They don't care about Taiwan is not an issue for them now. And if there was a conflict, if they're doing business with Russia right now, they most certainly will still be doing business with China in the event of one of these, this conflict, this blockade and sanctions the U.S. would try to isolate China with. Carl, you're talking about these ports in Myanmar and Pakistan. Isn't it interesting? And I've spent a lot of time exposing this, that the U.S. has armed groups physically attacking these infrastructure projects. They are deliberately destabilizing and trying to burn Myanmar to the ground to disrupt that port, and then the hydrocarbon pipeline that goes to Yunnan province. This is already a conflict, an armed conflict, but by proxy through hybrid means. But it is a conflict that has already been initiated. There is already arms conflict taking place, and it's the U.S. initiating it. And notice how China is not responding with aggression. They're doing it by just building more, trying to stabilize things and build more. It's very telling.
Yeah, because even in Pakistan, there is streams of attacks on the Chinese engineers building the infrastructure over there. But again, these countries are China's neighbors. They're right next door. China is not going anywhere. China can continually just pour resources to build out the infrastructure in these countries. Again, U.S. has been now, I mean, we are in the era of imperial overreach, right? U.S. is embroiled in the conflict all over the globe. It's quite overly ambitious for if U.S. planners think they can be at all places at all time. I mean, that's just impossible. So I mean, especially right now, they decide to take on China, Russia, and Iran. If you look at the land masses on a map, that's like much of the Eurasian continent right there. I mean, and as Brian pointed out, China is not forcing people to choose China or US. US is forcing people to choose. And guess what? When the chips are down, much people, at least in East Asia, Southeast Asia, in my neighborhood, people want to continue to do business with China. They're really annoyed with the United States publications. They see it as very dangerous. I mean, I think recently there was a meeting in Singapore where the ASEAN nation leaders pretty much told the U.S. that what are you guys doing, man? This is we just want to do business with China.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, from what you both were saying, I think we can end on this point, the interview portion, the conversation here. A lot of what you're saying is, both of you are saying is, the U.S. in terms of its hegemonic ambitions, it's kind of already lost. I mean, when you just think about all these scenarios, what's happened with Ukraine, the buildup toward China, it seems like a losing effort, but yet they can't stop because, as you said, Carl, this imperial overreach, this incessant need to achieve this very destructive mission, all because of the so-called quote unquote threat that Russia and China face to the empire. And I think the positive note here is that China and also Russia will continue to do what they do, and those things have very positive impacts on the world. And really, what's so necessary right now is to develop more of a collective consciousness in the collective West and in the United States to, understand the reality of the situation, the real politic, even if you don't support China and Russia politically or economically or whatever, just the reality of the situation is that this is only going to hurt more and more and more within the belly of the empire. But I wanted to give you two last reactions, and stick around, everyone. I have a lot of announcements, so I'm going to be on for a little bit after Carl and Brian depart. But final words for both of you, and also where people can find you.
The multipolar world is here today. It's already a reality, despite the screaming of neocons in Washington. And people in US will have to recognize it sooner or later. And thank you for inviting me to your stream. And it's always good to see you, Brian. And people can find me on Twitter. I'm a prolific shit poster. My Twitter handle is just Carl Zha, my name. And I also run a podcast, the Silk and Steel podcast. It's available on Patreon. I mostly focus on China, history, politics, and culture. Currently, I'm doing a chronological retelling of Chinese history from the beginning. I'm already progress to 632 BC, and I just recently concluded. I also had done a Taiwan history series with Xiang Yu, who is in Taiwan right now. He's serving his military service in Taiwan, his military. So he was actually born the 4-month military service. That only, I think, started with people who were born after 94. And he was just born before that. So he had to serve 1 year. But he could serve his military service from home. So he's enjoying Taiwan right now, his homeland. And so we did a Taiwan history series together, very comprehensive breakdown of Taiwan political history from the beginning again to the present. And I just recently concluded the Chinese Civil War Manchurian campaign series. Tonight I'm gonna start the next part of Chinese Civil War series on Northern China, and that if that floats your boat, and check me out, my podcast, Silk and Steel podcast, on Patreon. And again, thank you, Danny, for inviting me, and it's always fun to talk with Brian.
Well, likewise. I just my last thought is, Danny, you were talking about Western imperialism. They have no exit strategy. These are people who, even if their life depended on it, wouldn't know how to look inward and build up their own civilization. This is all they know. They're not qualified to run a society or to invest and build up a society. They have no technical knowledge of how that actually is done. They don't know how to. Unlike elsewhere in the world where leaders have backgrounds in engineering and actual tangible processes that build up a society, in the West, they are career politicians. That is their occupation, just career politician. And there's less flattering ways to put that. So unfortunately, they don't have an exit strategy, and this is what they're going to be doing. So look at what multipolarism is. It is looking at these corrupt, imploding corporations across the West, corporations and financial institutions, and creating physical, tangible alternatives. Banks that actually function in the interest of the state and the people. Industry that actually creates and builds and infrastructure. Businesses, trade. That's what's being done in terms of multipolarism at the national, regional, and global level. We can all contribute to that by just these think tanks in the West drumming up these wars. They have lists of their corporate sponsors. You can look at that list. You can make sure that your money is not going to those corporations. Instead, invest in corporations that are being built up as alternatives across the world of multipolarism, and also support local businesses. I know it might be difficult in the West. Here in Thailand, there's so many local businesses, just like your neighbors and your friends and your family. Just send, because that's how empire is built. It's built not overnight by a single person with one sweeping motion. It is millions and millions of contributions every single day from our wallets, from our time, our energy. It's all adding up. And to fight imperialism, it's going to take millions of people every day in tiny ways, adding up over time, investing elsewhere into something better that we believe in and that actually represents a brighter future for all of us. So that's kind of a thing that I used to focus on a lot, actually, on my Land Destroyer blog way back when. I think it's something we all should start thinking about again, because it's one thing to talk about this, but we also have to get active and do things. And fortunately, we can do things every single day, every time we open our wallet or every time we pay attention to something. That attention, that time, that energy is also valuable, and where we spend it is important. So thank you very much, Danny, for inviting me. Carl, always a pleasure. And as a matter of fact, Carl and also Mark Sloboda are going to be joining me on the 20th this month. We're going to be talking about Russian-Chinese ties, past, present, and future. I think that'll be extremely interesting. Two guys who love to go on tangents. So I will have to find a way to
makes our life easier, honestly.
Yeah. And if you want to find my work, just search on YouTube for The New Atlas. And then in the video description of every single video are other places you can find and follow my work on Telegram. My blog is actually still landdestroyer.blogspot.com. And please follow me there, because if YouTube ever gets rid of me, I'm also on Rumble and Odyssey and all of those places. So again, thank you, Danny. And again, always a pleasure, Carl.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Make sure you're following all of their work. Stick around for announcements, and we'll definitely be in touch soon. Both of you guys, Carl and Brian. See you later.
Bye.
All right. So that was a really good conversation, everyone. I wanted to, I'm not going to be on too much longer. Um, that was really great. Stick around though for 5-10 more minutes. That was a great conversation. It's always great with Brian and Carl, and there's a network of us now. I feel like really trying to amplify each other, and so that's great. Talking about these issues, not many people, honestly. So I went longer than usual, but I'm not mad, and I hope you aren't either. Before you all go, Monday, I might be on again Sunday. I might not be. I stream. My schedule is like 2 or 3 times a week. And I already have something planned Monday at noon, and you want to be there. So stick around because you want to make sure that you have Monday noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. What else is it? 12 a.m. midnight Beijing time. Whatever. I'm trying to do some more of the what is it? 2 p.m. maybe. Was it 2 or 1 p.m. British time? No. What am I saying? 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. British time. I forget which. Jeffrey Sachs, Monday at noon. All right. So make sure you're already subscribed here. Make sure you hit that notifications bell so you're ready for Jeffrey Sachs at noon. That's going to be a really good conversation. I have a lot of questions for Jeffrey Sachs. He's been one of the more outspoken voices who has connections to the establishment. It should be very interesting. So do save it. If you can't be there, put it on the background if you're working or on your phone, and then catch the playback later. Whatever you can do to support that interview, because you'll want to make sure that you're both either there and or helping amplify that one. So please do make sure that you make that. So I just wanted to announce that. And of course, you all did such an incredible job liking this video. We already have over 1,000 likes. We had over 1,000 viewers, despite the fact that we had, it's a Friday night for me. It's a Saturday morning for others. Might be the middle of the night for some people. So incredible that you all support this channel and, Carl and Brian's work. And, you're helping this channel grow. You really are. So the best way to help it grow, though, it's the holiday season. There's a lot that you can do to give to independent media. One of those ways is by either becoming a member here on YouTube. We got a new member from this stream. And the best way to do this is patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can also go to Substack. I'll let you know a little bit about me because I know I attract audiences from all across the political spectrum who are anti-imperialist or anti-war. I come from a background of I'm that like communist, that socialist, that far leftist that everyone is taught to hate. And, but for me, it's so funny. It's like, I'm not a threat. I am here to promote a message and to talk with people who are doing similar work and who are promoting an overall understanding, not just of geopolitics, because we can all do that, but to also help people in the places where it matters most, in the warmongering states of the world, the warmongering states of America, the American empire, the collective West, these places where this is where the hegemon centers around, this is where empire centers around, to get more people to understand that they need to be part of a class struggle. They need to be part of a class struggle against empire. And so that's what a lot of this channel does. So I wanted to share with you, though, a Substack article that I recently wrote. You can support me on Substack annually. You can do it on Patreon as well annually through one of the tiers. But a lot of people like Substack. And I just wanted to share. I'm not going to read this article because I need to get my behind to bed. But I've been doing this Ghost Stories of Capitalism series. Essentially, what I'm doing here is I am using my personal experiences to show you how I've gotten to where I am now politically, so that a lot of organizing, a lot of moving people, a lot of information building, education, political education really hinges upon a lot of stories, not just like studying theory outright, not just reading history, but also being able to place both theory and history in the context of your own life and the lives of others and the way that people are living in this real world so that they feel compelled to move. And so the Ghost Stories of Capitalism series hits on different subjects that may be taboo, especially to a lot of geopolitics followers, maybe feeling like kind of alien, and also because of this kind of identity reductionism, identity politics culture, and culture wars culture, it may feel like, this is anathema. But I think it's very important to understand where we all come from. And so that's what I do in this piece. And I talk about my experiences with racism in the United States and how it really did inform my eventual um, place of wanting to struggle against the empire first and foremost, because I see everything, especially the inner workings of racism inside the United States, as an extension of the empire, right? And as an extension of an empire that's been building for honestly centuries now, but now has reached this state of overreach. I love the way Carl put that because it's very succinct. But I wanted to share this with you so that you go understand me better, and we can build actual bridges, we can understand each other better, and know that even if you don't agree with this or 100% or understand all of it 100%, that it's part of what I do. It's part of the education and background I come out of. And I talk a lot about my personal experiences as a working class person. I talk about what it's like to um experience racism in America, and how that led me to study empire abroad, why the United States' hegemonic ambitions, its imperialist ambitions, are connected to that, and why it's important to tell these stories. So, I do write as well. I don't write as much as I once did, but usually once a month you'll catch me on CGTN or writing my own stuff or in Black Agenda Report. And so that's part of what I do. And it's also it's where I started, right? But now I'm doing streaming more full time, and so of course supporting this channel is the best way to support my work at this time. You can also do so on Rockfin. You can leave tips there. You can subscribe on Rockfin. You got to support platforms like Rockfin, rockfin.com, um, rockfin.com/the left lens. So before I go, it's 11:33 here. Yes, I was weekly on bar. No longer can do weekly, but I do the best I can. I'm just going to thank you all for the super chats as best I can. Thank you so much, XS or Ron XX. Thanks so much for the super chat. A lot of friendly super chats today. Thank you, JM, for being a member and for your generosity. Thank you so much, David, for the super sticker. Let's close out the evening on a great note. Let's see. Oh, I see Alex from Reportify in here. I need to get you and Patrick on here soon. Maybe after the Jeffrey Sachs interview. That will be fun. I'll definitely be in touch because I am looking for someone else to have later in this month. So that would be good. I'm just, I'll definitely need people when the Russia's offensive starts happening. Thank you, Mike EUS or MICEUS. Let's see what else we got here. I know we had a lot more. Thank you so much again, XXR on XX, for the generosity. Yeah, these super chats are incredibly helpful. Thank you so much to Intermediary Fossil for that. Yes, indeed. The life expectancy in China has surpassed the United States. That's all you need to know. This country, China. You all know that China, most people didn't live to the age of 40 in 1948. Like, this is a huge change. Thank you so much, Eric Suarez, for the super chat. CIA is working hard to take down leftist governments in Latin America to stop us from working with China. This is true. This is true. Indeed, indeed. We saw Peru, Argentina. They're not doing they're not doing an amazing job because, again, imperial overreach. I don't think they have the ability to really shift the tide so much at the moment because of how weak the United States is. But yes, Peru, that's a setback no matter how you slice it. Same with Argentina. Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner is to the left of the current president, and she was probably going to run, and she was probably going to win at some point in the near future. So thank you so much, 31st Century Socialism. Yeah, no, I would love if Brian and Carl were here at the same time. That would be very interesting. I would love to do that. I would love to build up to the point where, yeah, I mean, I think both of our names, all of our names are somewhat known, but in the US, that'd be tough to organize. But I really appreciate that comment. Thank you so much, Roberts, for Yang. Talk about the constructive web. We need solutions like Melted. Yeah, I mean, I know that there's some people working on this project. Please do continue to work on these alternatives, and we can boost them as best we can. Thank you so much, Roberts, for Yang. I think we need alternatives. The Twitter files not showing me much. I'm not like, oh my god, the Twitter files. I feel like too much partisan chicanery and shenanigans for me to take them so seriously. But it is serious in the sense it's stuff that we already knew was happening that's getting out there now. And thank you, Christopher Edstrom, for the super chat. And I think with the Twitter files, what we're seeing is what happens when censorship revelations, leaks are politicized. And I don't like that, because we're obviously seeing how this is being framed as like, oh, only the right is attacked. And I think that's ridiculous as someone who has been censored on social media, who is right. This channel in and of itself had such slow growth for so long, because if you don't play to the algorithm, you don't get seen. And now, thankfully, that's been changing a bit. But still, I mean, I think, I think that, there are topics on here that won't get seen because of censorship. And a lot of them have to do with leftist topics. And it's not left as in Democratic Party, but left as in, actually opposing the empire, actually, calling out power and the ruling elite, people like Elon Musk, who is in the ruling elite. And I don't trust for a second. So while I do think that a lot of the data is important, the information is important that's being leaked, and I'm certainly not going to say that this stuff isn't happening. I'm not going to go so far and disparage the content, but I will say that it is very one-sided. It is full of bias, and it's in politically, it's not going to help much if we all start to think that censorship is just some partisan targeting of one party to another. That's just not what's going on. It's much bigger than that. It's not just some amorphous free speech. It's about power, trying to hold on to power. Powerful people trying to hold on to power. And Elon Musk is doing the same thing. I mean, where's Scott Ritter? Where's all these accounts, all these Palestinian accounts, all these accounts from Nicaragua, Venezuela, from China, right? All these accounts that have been labeled Russia state-affiliated media. Where's their a reckoning? Where are they in the Twitter files? Where are we all? Where's our blacklist? We know we're blacklisted. Give me a break. So I'm not confident that that's going to come out. I really am not. Some people are like, wait and see, because they're like Elon Musk fan people. And it's like, we shouldn't be treating this oligarch like that, in my opinion. I mean, look, I'm not saying what is happening now is bad overall in terms of the information, but politically it could be really a real big conundrum if we don't sort that out. Thanks so much, F Chow. I hope that we commented on the post. I'm not sure what post you're referring to, but thanks for the super chat. Thanks so much again, F Chow. Oh, how can Taiwanese allow TMSC to move to the US? They should be revolting against it. That's outrageous. I agree. Unfortunately, I think TMS, I think the local elections were kind of a revolt against it, but yeah, you're right. There should be more going on. Thanks so much, Intermediary Foss, for the really, really generous super chat here. It's true. If they lived in China, yeah, I think the majority of Americans would like living in China much better. Food is great. Transportation is easy. Wages are much more in line with the cost of living in a lot of ways, not on all ways. I mean, there's some things that still are needed to be addressed, like housing prices, but most people can find a place to live. If not all people have a place to live. And so, that's different than the United States, where a lot of people not just can't afford a place to live, but can't find anywhere to be because of how dire the housing situation is. We're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not more, more than 1 million people who are in that situation, probably millions more in a state of precarity, just so close to that situation as well. And as someone who's worked with homeless individuals in the United States as a caseworker for many years, 2-3 years, I can tell you that situation is, one that just indicates exactly what Carl was saying in reference to imperial overreach and all of that. It's, it's really bad. It's like, it's something that just shows how glaringly American exceptionalism doesn't exist. Sorry, say Lou, for not getting to this question. Ask Brian why Donetsk keeps getting pounded. Sorry about that, but thanks so much for the super chat. And Brian and I are actually gonna get together more than once. I would like to work with him once a month if possible, but common more frequently, because his work is great, and I think we do well together. Thanks again so much, JM. All right, I should lots of super chats, so it's actually getting late. But you heard the news. Jeffrey Sachs on Monday, 12/12. Thanks so much, Top JJ. Thanks again, JM. Jeffrey Sachs, 12/12 at 12 at 12 noon Eastern, though. Not 12 a.m. Beijing, but 12 noon Eastern, Jeffrey Sachs. We'll talk about Ukraine. We're going to talk about China. Jeffrey Sachs actually has been to China many times. He has deep relations in China. Should be interesting. We'll have about 45 minutes, I think, for that conversation. And 30 to 45 minutes. So it won't be a long one, but you'll want to catch it. All right, everyone. I think that's it for the super chat. Thanks, and thank you so much, Elfon, for becoming a new YouTube member. So again, you can support this work by becoming a YouTube member, hitting that join button. $5 per month gets you early announcements, gets you early announcements, direct access. I talk to members first. Patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. I communicate with supporters. I do early announcements there. All that good stuff. You all get special treatment for supporting me in that way financially. So you definitely want to do that. And then the tiers have other benefits as well that you can lock into. So again, we're in the holiday season, everyone. So I hope that you can give the gift of supporting independent media. If you can't, just keep coming back. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notifications bell, and that's a great way. Liking these videos, a great way to support this work as well. So everyone, good night. My Friday night's about to end. It's about to be Saturday, and maybe I'll be back Sunday night, but it's more likely that you'll see me after the weekend, and you'll see me Monday at wow, we're almost heading to 3 hours here. Monday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Beijing, 5 p.m. British time, I think. The time change always messes me up. It's either 5 or 4 or something like that. But hope to see you there. Take care, everyone. Good night. And I'll see you all very soon. Peace.